The Chicago Bears are in the playoffs and they're out within the first game. Time after time, this organization, they don't have it right. It's just a absolute disaster right now. You just do not know what's going to take place. You know, is it the GM? I know I went on this tangent before. You don't know what the problem is here. Mitchell Trubisky, he looked good, but once again, he was playing bad defenses. This is getting old. It's that stale potato chips that's been in the back of your pantry for years now. And you just now found them and you thought they're good again, but then you realize they're stale. This is what this Bears team is. They're stale. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, they lost 21-9 in the playoffs yet again. And here we are with the same narrative on this Bears team.
The Bears all season were an absolute roller coaster. And the fact that they snuck into the playoffs is partially due to the weak NFC and partially because they ended the season strong, partially because Kyler Murray was limited in the Cardinals last game. There is a lot to talk about, but we'll go over what this means for the Bears offseason here in a few weeks after the playoffs wrap up and everything. But just focusing on that ugly game once again, oh my goodness. I don't know how much more. I'm not even a Bears fan, and Matt Nagy's play calling just pissed me off even more than usual in this game. There were things that he was calling that were working for a few weeks at the end of the season other than the Green Bay game because he started to go away from some of those tendencies. We know that Detroit and Minnesota can't play defense, but he was still calling the right plays, calling play action, using Trubisky's athleticism to his advantage. It opened up the Bears' run game. But for some inexplicable reason, the Bears ran almost every single play from under center in this game, which basically eliminates Trubisky's ability to run the football. You're doing the Saints a favor there. Why? I don't understand that at all. And then we saw him regress to the running it up the middle with David Montgomery or Cordero Patterson, who's not a run up the middle type of guy unless it's a kick return. He's just not playing to the offense's strengths. He did call a lot of play action from under center, rolling out to the left, which has had some success, but he calls it so often at this point that the defense has seen it on tape. The Bears only had one healthy, good wide receiver by the end of the game with Darnell Mooney not playing and Anthony Miller getting ejected. So they were down to Robinson, who was blanketed pretty good. And we also know what happened with Javon Wims, who did not get a revenge game against New Orleans. There are so many question marks here. I hated that he didn't do any sort of variations off that play action to confuse the defense a little bit. Could have tried it to the other side, but it was almost always the rollout and try to hit Cole Kmet for 5 yards. It's just, it worked for a while, but with the limited running game, because you're not using Trubisky out of shotgun, you are just keeping all of the Bears' offensive weaknesses and none of their strengths. It's just completely useless. And it reminded me of ice cream. And I don't mean the food ice cream, which is great. I mean the song Ice Cream by Blackpink that came out this year. That song annoys the living shit out of me, and so does Matt Nagy's play calling.
I'm right there with you. Matt Nagy, he's inconsistent as a play caller. You don't know which one you're going to get, and maybe that helps out for the defenses, but not if you don't move the ball. I mean, David Montgomery was a force down the stretch. Absolute force. He gets 12 carries in this game. You looked at what the Eagles did to beat these Saints. They put up big points against them. Granted, I know Jalen Hurts has more mobility than Trubisky, but you also got to consider that's how they move the ball on this team. So I don't understand why there weren't many quarterback runs, especially when you lose your two best receivers, or at least 2 and 3. You were down to your 4, which was Allen Robinson, Javon Wims were your 2 because Mooney, and you lost Miller due to stupid. That was just stupid for what Anthony Miller did. But anyway, when that happens and you start losing weapons on the outside, wouldn't you think about running the ball? I mean, that's just normal logic to where you're like, hey, if they can't catch it, we saw Wims go right through the breadbasket, and they couldn't run the ball. So run the ball. I don't understand. Like you said, these play calls were absolutely hideous all day long, and I think he's got to get out of town. I'm sick and tired of this guy week after week, year after year, doing the same exact things. And I want to quote Dan Orlovsky on, I think it was Get Up, something on ESPN. He said that they had 18 games where they scored 1 touchdown or less. This is an offensive mastermind, and you're scoring 1 touchdown or less in 18 games in 3 years. That's horrible. That's 33% of the games. That's not going well, and I'm sick and tired of it. Too much inconsistency. Run the ball. and play to your offensive strengths because he's hurt Trubisky. Trubisky's hurt him. It's just been a bad marriage.
It was almost the Adam Gase of play calling and effectiveness. It really is in that territory overall. Now, I do at least want to put out that the Bears' offensive line is not very good. It's young. It's getting a little bit better. But it's also not the type of offensive line that you can run up the middle very often using. And the Bears' tight ends aren't great in terms of blocking and helping them out either, especially Jimmy Graham. So I just don't understand that. We saw the Bears have some success running the ball using that zone read, relying on Trubisky to make the read. And I know that that's a risky bet, but at least running it to the outside a little bit, spreading out the defense, it adds another dimension to the Bears offense. We saw it be effective in 3 or 4 straight games to end the season. And then in the Bears' 2 biggest games against Green Bay and New Orleans, they go away from what was working. I don't understand that. I'm never going to understand that. I understand the personnel is limited, but there were so many things you could point to here. The Bears also tried to run the ball up the middle a lot on 2nd and 10. I never liked that call regardless of the team, but I especially don't like it for the Bears because they just don't have the offensive line, the protection. And when they kept doing it from under center, they didn't have the threat of Trubisky running to balance it out and confuse the defense. So it made the Saints' life easier, which is never the goal. In fairness, they should have had 1 touchdown in the second quarter. Javon Wims dropped a perfect pass from Trubisky on a great play call. I actually really liked that trick play call there. It was well executed. It should have been a touchdown. We talked about the Bears Saints meeting in the regular season where both coaches were trying to lose the game. I thought that again in this game. I didn't really like what Sean Payton was doing either. He was surprisingly passive in the first half, giving the Bears more opportunities. But in fairness, the Bears offense sucks and it didn't come back to bite him. The Saints finally got some points on the board in the second half. And it was when they made it 14-3, the game was essentially over.
Yeah, you knew with the Bears offense going that day, it wasn't going to get going, especially down 14-3. That was rough. And you texted me during the game. You said after they took that long incomplete pass, they ran it right after that. And that's just stupid play calling. Yeah, I remember you saying Matt Nagy is just he's stupid. There's no other word to describe it than stupid. That's what Matt Nagy has been, dare I say, for the majority of his Bears tenure. I mean, he's just it's so hard with this coach because he's supposed to be this, he's supposed to be that, but the only thing he's given you is L's in big games and just not putting it all together consistently. That defense has been very good. I mean, think about this team. They've made the playoffs in 2 of the last 3 years, and they went 8-8 last year. They haven't had a losing season under Matt Nagy, and he's the thing that's holding them back.
It's really crazy to think about. I don't think it's fair to put all the blame for the Bears' problems as a team on him. Yes, he's definitely not good as a play caller. I think we can agree on that. I think there are at least some things to be encouraged by in terms of he's helping get at least a decent record out of the team. He did get them out of that 6-game losing streak, got the Bears refocused, won 3 straight games. That's not easy to do. So I do think that's a sign that he hasn't lost the locker room, which is important because we have seen what type of detrimental effect that can have on other coaches across the league. But you definitely see some of the downsides with him. I do think it's fair to say he's holding back some of the ceiling of this team. But at the same time, the personnel that he's had to work with hasn't been great. It sounds like Allen Robinson is most likely out the door. He wasn't much of a factor, but part of that is because Mooney and Anthony Miller were not factors in this game after Miller's ejection, and the Saints could really focus their attention on Allen Robinson. And it forced the Bears to try to win using a ineffective running game. And, the 4th and 5th wide receivers on the depth chart. We saw Cole Kmet make a couple plays. Graham had the walk-off touchdown in the least dramatic way possible. And, I do think, in fairness, there was some questionable officiating that went against the Bears in this game. I don't think they would have won anyway, but that unsportsmanlike conduct on Cole Kmet in the first half is one of the worst calls I have ever seen. And you can definitely make the argument that ruined some momentum because the game was very much still up in the air. It was 7-3, and that was the score for a long time in this game. And so the Bears had the opportunities. They dropped one. They had the penalty on another. But overall, we saw it in the second half where they were finally just beating themselves. And they don't need any help to do that. They had 5 or 6 straight punts in the second half. And since he's been there for 3 years, I just don't trust Matt Nagy enough to change his play calling consistently, because I thought he was doing it for a few weeks and then he regressed the last 2 games. And that is a very discouraging sign.
I know the sample size was small, but a lot of people are going to say he's had Mitch to work with. False. He had Nick Foles to work with for a few weeks. I mean, now Foles isn't the best thing, but he's had another quarterback to maybe kickstart this offense. But it's the same thing with him, not running the ball, still passing it 900 times a game. That's not going to win you games. It's just simple as that. Maybe it does for the Colts back in their days with Andrew Luck, but that doesn't work in this league right now with what all's going on there. You have to have some sort of a run game that otherwise they'll just play deep the whole time and leave everyone wide open.
Well, that's the frustrating part. The Bears actually had a running game, but it wasn't with Nick Foles. If anything, their running game was worse because Foles is not a mobile threat, and you can't use him in the zone read action. We need to give credit where it's due. When Trubisky came in, he played some of his best football of his career. He's been significantly better, and he does add that dimension where you can run the football. And David Montgomery looked like a completely different player, in part because of Trubisky's presence on the field, and also in part because they were running a lot more plays out of shotgun. And it just the opposing defenses wouldn't be able to key in on him as much because they had to respect Trubisky's ability to run. When you run from under center and keep calling these play actions rather than RPOs, it completely limits that aspect of the running game. And we saw Trubisky scramble a handful of times in the game and get 5-yard gains or so. And that's great. That's something he can do. But there were clearly no designed runs in this game. And it just made life easier for the Saints defense, which has really thrived in the last quarter of the season anyway. So it's just, to me, playing in their hands. I do want to give some credit to the Bears defense, especially the secondary. They played very well throughout the game. We especially saw Tashawn Gibson, who I thought was all over the field in this game, kind of a throwback for him. But Eddie Jackson also had a very brutal, disastrous offsides penalty that extended a Saints drive that eventually led to them getting 7 points instead of 3. And those type of little mistakes, when your offense is that ineffective, are a death sentence in a regular season game, much less the playoffs, and the season's over.
I'm going to get in this to a little bit next week, or not next week, but when we do the whole Bears season breakdown. But Eddie Jackson had a horrible season. He's been bad the last 2 years. Very, very bad. Last year, you give him the benefit of the doubt because he had a position change with Clinton Dix coming in there after they lost Adrian Amos. But this year, he was back to his old position. You have Tashawn Gibson there as well. There's no excuses. You got to play better football, man. And that penalty's huge. So, yes, we understand where he was drafted, but he's been enough to where you know exactly what you're going to get from him, except for these last 2 years where he has struggled mightily.
Well, I mentioned that when we recorded last week that he's been struggling, and that's discouraging. The Bears were missing Roquan Smith and Jalen Johnson on that side of the ball, which was huge. I know we kind of touched on that last week also. The Bears were missing 3 of their more important players, 1 on offense, 2 on defense. That didn't help. Jackson kind of went to the Kamoko Toure school of going off sides at the worst possible time. We saw that a couple times this weekend in the playoffs. But just to touch on it quickly, Jackson is one of Ryan Pace's biggest hits as general manager. He did earn that contract, and he's not earning the salary he's making right now. He is still young. He's still very capable of bouncing back, but it's definitely a discouraging thing to see because he is on that big money deal. He was so good to start off, and he has struggled in recent years, and that culminated in this game, I'd say, because the rest of the secondary, including Kindle Vildor, who's a rookie taking over for Jalen Johnson, I thought played very well considering the circumstances. And the Bears secondary is still not the reason that they lost this game. I do want to make that clear.
Yeah, most of the issues were on the offensive side, which have been for the majority of the Bears franchise, to be exact. But anyway, one more note on the Bears. I know we're going to get into this later as well, but Allen Robinson, we both know he should be out of town. Let me pop up a tweet real quick from Jeff Dickerson. He reports for the Bears on ESPN. Bears wide receiver Allen Robinson, free agent, said repeatedly this morning that everything is on the table in terms of his future, but added in regards to the Bears, I personally feel like we had an opportunity to be able to get something done over the past 365 days. And after this tweet, someone said anything from a Jaguars page. He liked it. Not going to speculate here, but maybe he's feeling some sort of literally anything is on the table. So with that being said, let's get into some hockey talk. Sticking in Chicago, we'll head over to the Blackhawks. We have a guest coming up for the New York Rangers segment, Vinny Milani from the Power Play podcast and the Rough Cut Sportscast. He'll be joining around for the New York Rangers talk, but let's get into the Blackhawks. So we've already discussed some of the Blackhawks. First thing, the Central Division realignment. You have Carolina, Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Detroit, Florida, Nashville, Tampa Bay in that Central Division. Last season was a little rough, 32-30 and 8 overtime losses / shootout. They lost in round 2, snuck into the playoffs, and showed a little bit of fight. Good for them. Corey Crawford, good for him as well. He is heading to retirement. But the Hawks, there's a lot of question marks, a lot of youth on this hockey team. What are you expecting out of the Hawks this season?
I honestly don't expect a lot. I think they're in a similar position to last year. They do have some talented pieces on offense. Their defense is a clear weakness, and their goaltending is going to be a major problem, I think, throughout the season. Blackhawks fans have complained about Corey Crawford, I think, unfairly for a long time. Look at the alternatives. Would you like to have him back yet? Or maybe you could bring Scott Darling back. It's just, I hear it for so often. I'm not going to sit here and say that Crawford was perfect, but he at least brought some stability to the goaltending position we haven't seen since Scott Foster took over for a period. And it is going to be an issue throughout the season, I'd say, unless you see some significant growth from Colin Delia, which I think is possible. I think you're more likely to see it from him than Malcolm Subban, but that is definitely an underwhelming goaltending tandem. And there's obviously a lot to talk about with the Chicago forwards, because 2 of their best and most important forwards are going to miss significant time.
Yeah, Jonathan Toews is out indefinitely with an illness. Praying for you, Captain. Hope you get better. Big illness there. Hopefully he gets back on the ice, or just frankly gets better in general, because that's what we care for, is just health and safety of players and people. I mean, that's basically what we're here for. Kirby Dach, another hit at the center position. We talked about him in the last episode about his wrist issue that he had, where he broke it heading in the World Juniors tournament. He's out 4 to 5 months. Malcolm Subban, Colin Delia, like you mentioned, this is going to be the most inexperienced goaltending tandem in the National Hockey League. Brandon Saad was traded to Colorado for Nikita Zadorov. That was a transaction that took place. And the line 1 center on opening night, I would assume, would be Dylan Strome, who just locked up a 2-year deal.
I do think it's going to be Dylan Strome, and I do want to reiterate what you said about Toews. Let's just hope he's going to be okay first and foremost. If he can come back and play hockey after that, that would be great. But he is the second high-profile player we've seen have previously unknown medical issue, Lundqvist being the first, and I will hope that they are both going to be okay. We kind of talked about Dach an episode or 2 ago, but I'll reiterate that. The Blackhawks took an unnecessary risk sending him to the World Juniors. He got hurt on a fluke in the preliminary qualifying game in that tournament. Now he's going to miss most, if not all, of the regular season, which is very detrimental considering the Blackhawks need that player development, considering they are very far away from being a contending team, despite the one upset they pulled over the Oilers. I thought that series against Vegas is a much more accurate representation of what the Blackhawks can expect to be this year. They really haven't made too many external improvements or internal improvements, especially with Dach being injured. And I do want to talk about this, get your opinion on it first. But I have thoughts on the Brandon Saad trade, and I wanted to get yours to start with, because they sent him to Colorado. They got Zadorov and Anton Lindblom in return, 2 defensemen. What are your thoughts on that?
I see Zadorov's on a 1-year contract, and I see Stan Bowman traded Saad again. So I'm obviously not too pleased here. But, I mean, it's just Brandon, what's the deal with Bowman trading players that he has and then getting them back and sending them off again? With Patrick Sharp, Marcus Kruger, and a bunch of others. I mean, we could go on for days with all these players that they have sent away and brought back. I mean, stop doing it. You get worse and worse return every single time you do it. It's not good for your system. Will Zadorov play? Yes. Will he bring enough? Maybe. I mean, you just don't know what you're going to get out of him. Once again, 1-year contract. I don't like that at all. If you're trading Brandon Saad, who is one of the fastest skaters in the National Hockey League and is going to shine with weapons around him in Colorado, you would hope to get someone that they could at least build on the defensive side, because to me, that's an Oli Mata replacement.
I'm going to take it a step further. That Brandon Saad was clearly the Blackhawks' best remaining trade chip over the offseason. And I'm going to disagree entirely here. You know exactly what you're getting from Nikita Zadorov. He is 25 years old. He's a 6'5" defenseman. He is a very physical, big, stay-at-home guy who's never put up more than 20 points in an NHL season. He is not going to improve that defense in terms of getting the puck out of the defensive zone. He might clear a little bit of room in front of the crease so the goalies can see the shots better, but they're going to be hemorrhaging shots just like they were before. And Anton Lindblom, I think, is supposed to start the season on the third pairing for the Blackhawks, but he's barely played in the NHL. He is 26. So we aren't talking about prospects who are 18, 19, or even 21, 22 who should show some improvement. It's possible Lindblom has an extra gear that we haven't seen yet, but Zadorov has played enough in the NHL where I think you can expect to know what you're expecting. He played for a much better team in Colorado and didn't do anything offensively. He filled his role fine, but to me, he's a third pairing defenseman. And Lindblom, hell, maybe they're going to be the defensive pair in Chicago at some point. But is that really the best you can do for your best remaining trade chip? Maybe it is for Stan Bowman, but for someone with more than half a brain cell, I think they could have gotten a much bigger return. The Blackhawks have a clear weak spot on the defensive side, and I get addressing that, but they went for these two guys with their floors and ceilings already defined. They didn't go for guys that really have a lot of upside. Now, maybe Lindblom proves me wrong. He's not the same type of big body physical guy. He's only 6 foot, I believe. So hopefully there's a little bit more offense and skating to his game from the back end. But Zadorov is a 6'5" guy. I know he's only on a 1-year contract. He's a physical guy who's not going to provide much on offense. He's going to be more of a penalty killing type. And I don't like the idea of trading your best defenseman for a guy with very limited upside, or two guys with very limited upside. You swing for the fences here. You're rebuilding. I hated the logic behind it.
Yeah, it's not good at all. I mean, once again, Bowman, it's going to be tough to see because you don't know what you're going to get. I mean, you said you do, but I mean, it's tough here. But one name I wanted to bring up who had a bad year last year, looking at it all together, Alex DeBrincat. I think this is huge. Yes, the Hawks aren't going to win a lot of games, but if he can bring enough offensively, they should win enough. They should win more because he was a good player his first 2 years in the league. And then last season kind of took a step back. I mean, most of his goals came on the power play. Most by meaning some, like most of his goals did, but he didn't have a lot. So that's saying something about DeBrincat and what he's gone through. So hopefully he has a better year. One also a big name to consider here. Actually, let's just to talk about DeBrincat real quick. Do you think he has the ability to bounce back, or do you think it's something going forward with him?
He does have the ability to bounce back, although I think the line mates are going to be important for him. If he has a stable player at the center position, which is going to be a lot more difficult now, but if you put him on the line with Soderberg, that might help. Just somebody who's stable enough and who can create enough offense for him to do his thing. I think he can bounce back to an extent. I don't think his ceiling is super high, but he can definitely be a top or middle six player in the NHL for a contending team. But he is being asked to be one of the stars for the Blackhawks, partially because of the injuries. And even without that, their depth at wing, other than him and Kubalik, I'd say is, and Patrick Kane, of course, is relatively underwhelming. They brought in Matthias Janmark in the offseason, and they got Andrew Shaw. These guys are middle or bottom six players. So there's not a lot of offensive upside other than the top two lines. Somebody has to get some points for the Blackhawks, who finished 18th in offense last year in goals per game. They're not at the bottom of the barrel there, so he could bounce back, but I think his upside is only decently high.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Andrew Shaw real quick. He's off long-term IR. We thought he'd start the season on that again with the concussion. He's back, says he's feeling great. He's not going to change his style of play. So that's a lot of things that people think about, especially grinders or enforcers, if you want to say that's really physical players getting a concussion. He said he's not going to shy away from that. That's his style of play. So something he's considering there. One name I want to bring up is Pius Suter. He's someone that came over from Swiss. He's going to be nice. He's going to have a top six role to start the season because you did have the injury to Carl Soderberg, who's unfit to participate now. So, I mean, you bring him in and you basically give him money to fill a need, and he can't even fill a need for you. So he's going to come back, but it's going to be later on in the season for him. Suter's a guy I like. I think he's going to break out this year. You saw it 2 years ago. Dominic Cahoon was the rookie that stepped up. Last year, Dominic Kubalik, both Dominics. And then you have this year is going to be Pius Suter. I think he's going to step up. 53 points in 50 games last year in the Swiss. He looks to be a good goal scorer there.
He was the Swiss League's top scorer. He's been putting up about a point a game there for a couple of seasons now in one of the best leagues in the world. It's not the best league in Europe. I think the KHL is known that way and the SHL is above it, but it is an upper tier legitimate hockey league where he was the best goal scorer and point getter. I think he's going to have a solid role. I think he's going to be top 9 at the very least. He won't be buried on the 4th line. And we got to give the Blackhawks credit where it's due. They have hit on a couple of solid international prospects or undrafted prospects going back to Panarin. Pius Suter was undrafted as well, and he should at least have a decent role on this team, partially because they don't have a lot of other options. But I do think he will have a solid impact. He has some decent upside here. It's kind of a plug and play type of situation, but I am curious to see what he does. And I think he's definitely worth a look.
And one young prospect to keep an eye on the defensive side is Ian Mitchell. This is someone that we've seen for years wait his way in Rockford and various other leagues where he hasn't gotten a shot. This year, he's getting a shot, and right now, via The Athletic, he's projected to be on the top D pairing with Duncan Keith. So big shoes to step in, especially going up against Tampa Bay to start the season on a Wednesday night.
Well, I think what you look for is not necessarily him to be a great player in game one, but you want to see some development and some improvement over the course of the season. The Blackhawks defensive core, I'd say, is below average. Duncan Keith is a great leader on that core who can definitely be a great example for these young players. I know Michael Crutil, the 4th round pick, has been in camp with the Blackhawks and under his wing a little bit. I don't know if he's expected to play opening night, but he might be getting into games sooner than you'd expect for a 4th round pick in this year's draft. So I think there's at least some upside to that Blackhawks defense, but it's also something that they need to focus a lot on and upgrade here in the near future. But we need to see these younger players and prospects play.
Yeah, and one of these younger kids, he's not going to make the team. He got waived earlier today because he got in a fight with Nick Seeler in practice, so they dropped the mitts, showed a little fisticuffs, scrapping a little way so far into training camp. So you love to see it, build that camaraderie. Fights make you better, I think, especially with teammates. Get your anger out, go back out, play more hockey. So I think that's good for them. On the goaltending situation, we talked about Delia, we talked about Subban. I think Kevin Lankinen might have some ability to come in and play some goaltending for them. I mean, I think one of these goalies is going to be so bad where they're going to have to be gone by the end of the season, or at least mid-season. So maybe Lankinen gets a shot there. Outside of him, there's not really too much.
Well, you also have to consider for every team that they're going to have what's called that taxi squad of players where you can have up to 4 to 6 more guys. The AHL season isn't going to start until the beginning of February. And I know the Rangers affiliate is only playing 2 other teams on their schedule in a really little bubble. So you're not going to see as much AHL player development this year for any team that you might in a typical year or a typical minor league season. So I'd be shocked if the Blackhawks make it through the season with 2 goalies, even if they're both healthy the whole time. I think that they're going to want to get these guys a look, get them some ice time, especially at the beginning of the season before the AHL starts. This will also provide them and every other team with the ability to put a couple prospects in the AHL. As long as they don't play any NHL games, it won't burn up a year of their entry-level contracts, so you can play them there or send them back to their junior league and still keep them under control. And I definitely think that's something that a team like the Blackhawks is going to take advantage of because they're a mostly young and inexperienced team.
That's a good point. And also, Jeremy Colleton's the head coach there. We've already seen what we've had from him. Now to talk about a more promising note, we'll switch over to the New York Rangers. And the Rangers are coming off an interesting season where they made the playoffs in a bubble. Of course, that's where they stood. They went 37-28-5 in the regular season. They lost in the qualifying round against Carolina. We're delighted to be welcoming in our guest, Vinny Milani, today from the Rough Cut Sportscast and Power Play Podcast. Everything that he does is pretty cool, so we're excited to bring him on. Swig's joining us, as always, again, and he's going to stick around for this segment as well. Vinny, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Once I got the invite on the hockey call, I was like, oh, dude, I'm sold. And then you said it was about the Rangers. I was like, oh, man, I'm definitely sold on this one. I'm ready to go.
This man has good taste.
Yeah, so basically the first thing we're going to talk about today with the Rangers is some transactions that transpired early on in the season, or in the offseason, I should say. Mark Stahl heads to Detroit. Why they took on that contract, I don't know, but he's no longer with the Rangers. Henrik Lundqvist, we had the sad story to report on him about going to Washington and having those issues where his playing career could potentially be going towards a decline to where he might have to retire. But outside of that, they waived their third string goaltender the other day, Keith Kincaid. Maybe it's a Devils reunion. They lost Corey Crawford. We'll get into the Hawks. But they also kept Ryan Strome and signed Jack Johnson. Those were a few moves they made. What were your guys' thoughts on the Rangers offseason approach?
Oh, everything was going good until you brought up Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson's a signing that the Rangers did to like protect some of their assets for the expansion draft. Like that's literally all Jack Johnson's going to be there for.
Yeah, I was definitely not a big fan of bringing him in at all. Like, you see the connection because the Rangers brought in Jacques Martin, who used to coach him in Pittsburgh, to coach the defense to replace Lindy Ruff. But Jack Johnson has been well known as the worst defenseman in hockey for the better part of 5 years now in Columbus and Pittsburgh. And the Rangers finally get rid of Stahl because they attached a second-round pick to Detroit, but then replace him with Jack Johnson. That's like going from watching that Paul Blart Mall Cop movie to that Fantastic Four movie from 4 years ago. You finally get done with one bad thing and then replace it with one of the only worst things to exist.
and it takes up a lineup spot as well. It's like literally you have Libor Hayek, who we got, I believe, from the in the deal for Ryan McDonough that's sent him to Tampa, and then Keandre Miller, who has absolutely been tearing it up during training camp. So it's like if Jack Johnson's in the lineup, one of those guys are not in the lineup, and I don't know. I'd rather see the young kids play rather than Jack Johnson be a human pylon.
Absolutely, man. I do not want to see Jack Johnson be the turnstile on the back end like we've seen from Stahl over the last few years. And it sounds like Keandre Miller is going to break camp with the Rangers. Yeah, top prospect they've had for the last couple of years. It will be on the opening night roster, it sounds like, which I think is great. You have him and Ryan Lindgren, who are kind of penciled in on that left side. Who, those two are solid in the top four, I hope. But that's going to leave Johnson and Brendan Smith battling for that last D spot. And I'm curious to see how that works out because I'd rather have one of them be the healthy scratch rather than Miller or Lindgren sitting in the press box.
Yeah, this is going to be tough to gauge real quick for this New York Rangers team. The Jack Johnson signing, he was bad in Columbus. He's basically been bad everywhere. He had a stint in Pittsburgh. He's just not really good. So like you guys said, wasting a roster spot, that's not good. So I want to talk about the development of these young players. Do you think that this is a huge year for their development purposes to where they could take that next step? Or you still think they're a few years away? You have Kakko, Lafreniere, the first round pick, of course. Fox and D'Angelo are also very young on that defensive side. Do you think this is a year where they could just take that next step, or do you still think they're a year or so away?
I think they're still a few years away. I know there's a lot of hype around the team this year. A lot of people are predicting us to be actually a pretty good team. There's one thing that bothers me with this team still. I'm not a big fan of David Quinn, the head coach. I don't think his defensive systems are actually that good. I think it's basically been a detriment to our team the past 2 seasons. I think he came from the college ranks at Boston University. I think he has time to develop as a head coach, but I think that is going to be like the one thing that bothers the Rangers for the few years that they have towards this rebuild.
I agree 100%. I definitely think the Rangers still have a very bright future. We're going to see some of those prospects be with the team this year. A couple of them are still a couple years away, possibly playing. And we've got Kravtsov in Russia, for example. You guys who aren't going to be on the team this season. But I still have not figured David Quinn out yet as a Rangers fan. He's been there for 2 full seasons now, and overall I'm leaning against him as well. But I still am willing to give him a little benefit of the doubt just because Lindy Ruff was in charge of that defense, and we saw the warning signs with him going back to when he was the Sabres and Stars head coach. And I'm hoping that we see some improvement with Jacques Martin and another year of experience under their belt. One thing I am encouraged by, at least early on, is it looks like Kakko is going to be filling Jesper Foss role in the top 6, and Lafreniere is going to be playing on the 3rd line with Hedel and Gauthier instead of one of them being buried on the 4th line and getting 7 minutes a night with Greg McKegg, which we saw way too often last season.
Thank God he's not there anymore. I mean, Greg McKegg was a serviceable player in the lineup, but I love Brett Howden. I'm a big Brett Howden guy. I think he has got a lot of potential. We saw him on the 4th line quite a lot last season. I was hoping he'd get bumped up. I'm not a big Julien Gauthier fan because at least in the playoffs, he was another one of those human pylons that every time he was out there, he just seemed like he didn't know where to be. Hopefully he can grow into that. Obviously, he got traded from Carolina. He's developing still. He's a very young player. He can develop into a better player. And I mean, he's on a line with Alexis Lafreniere, who's supposed to be an absolute stud, and then Filipino as well. I mean, the potential's there. If here's your shot.
I'm with you. I mean, there was one question I wanted to ask there because I get the Gauthier. I don't think he has a super high ceiling. I thought he was decent for the Rangers overall. I mean, he did enough for you to warrant being in the bottom six. My question would be, assuming that Lafreniere and Hedl stay on a line together, which seems like a decent possibility. If it's not Gauthier, who else would you really put on that winger side of it? You got Brendan Lemieux. I don't think the other options are all that inspiring, and you don't have guys with too much offensive upside.
Yeah, it's not too promising on that right side, to be honest. I mean, Brendan Lemieux, he can be a good grinder for that line if you do put him there. I mean, Alexis Lafreniere was able to not only be a great goal scorer in juniors, but he was able to move the puck fantastic. So, I mean, if you put Brendan Lemieux in front of the net there and let Philip Hedl and Lafreniere do all the work, I mean, that works. That works. I mean, we can hope that Gauthier plays well.
As long as it's better than Tanner Glass, is kind of my attitude. I just can't deal with him.
Off the face-off, what was it, in the first period against Montreal in that Game 1 series in 2014? Wow, that was surprisingly right off the top of my noggin there. Off the face of Tanner Glass, just first goal of the game in Game 1 of the series against Montreal. I was super stoked about it. I was like, did Tanner Glass really just do that? And then
he had a backhander bar down over Carey Price that ended up being the only goal in a 1-0 game. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. But overall, that actually tied me into the next question I wanted to ask. And one guy that Glass played over a lot when AV was still the coach with the Rangers, Vigneault, was Pavel Buchnevich. And I never understood him being scratched for him. We've seen Buchnevich kind of thrive the last year or two, have a bigger role. And he's been thriving on that line with Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad for the better part of 2 years. And Buchnevich, according to David Quinn, has been a standout player at camp. What are your expectations for him this season? Do you think that line chemistry is going to continue?
If he can keep the lines together, if he can keep that top line together, Buchnevich is going to be a great player this season for the Rangers. Last season, that was the problem. Kreider got hurt. Zibanejad was hurt. That line was never able to stay together all season long. If you get Zibanejad healthy, you get Kreider healthy, and Buchnevich, knock on wood, has not had too many injury problems. If they're all healthy, Buchnevich is going to play phenomenal if they keep that line intact. He's going to be used in the power play. He's going to be used as a top line forward. He has the potential to be a great player for this team.
I think this Rangers team has a lot of left wingers that are very good. You have Chris Kreider there. Of course, we know Panarin, and Lafreniere's coming over. He's going to have a legit role on that team. And it's just, I think there's a lot of talent on the left wing for this roster in general. The forward spots are really solid. It's just the defense that's holding them back a bit. But if you look, what do you see from this goaltending situation? Of course, you lose Hank. He's the big guy that's been there forever. But now you're going to two young guns. Shesterkin's looked really good last year. And you also have Georgiev there who has played a little bit. So do you think the goaltending can hold up in a year like this? Or do you think it's still going to be a work in progress?
Oh, yeah. The future is now, baby. Igor Shesterkin is going to light this league up. He is about to be a top might be a bold prediction here. Igor Shesterkin is a top 5 goaltender in the league this season. He's going to win the Calder, and he's going to be a top 5 goaltender in this league. The kid is an absolute stud. He played in the KHL before he came here, lit that league up for with one of the best teams in the KHL. I believe his save percentage was something unreal for that team. He comes over here, does well in his time in the regular season that he played, in the playoffs in his short time, played great. And then you have Alexander Georgiev, who is another good goaltender. Like that was he was backing up Henrik Lundqvist and then ended up playing over Henrik Lundqvist because he was sadly better than Henrik Lundqvist. So this tandem is going to be one of the best in the league, and Igor Shesterkin is going to win the Calder.
I could definitely see it, man. I'd love it. You brought up a great point that Shesterkin has dominated everywhere he's been, going back to Russia. He dominated the brief time he was in Hartford for the Rangers before he got called up. And he forced that call up and forced that 3-goalie situation the Rangers had for the second half of last season. He dominated in the 12 or 13 games he played before the season was paused. And Georgiev is an underrated part of that duo because I honestly think it's not going to be too far off from a timeshare. And that's not because and I'm not criticizing Shesterkin or anything, but we've seen the backup goalie be more important and play more games in the last few seasons. We got a 56-game season here. I would expect Shesterkin to play somewhere around 35 to 40 games at the most and Georgiev play the rest. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. They're both 24 years old. Georgiev could definitely get a shot to be a number one goalie down the road for somebody. And the great thing looking into the future a little bit is Shesterkin is exempt from the expansion draft, so the Rangers can protect Georgiev and just have a guy like Kincaid if he clears waivers or somebody similar to expose to Seattle. So this could be a long-term thing.
Yeah, that's what the Rangers did for this entire offseason. Like, as I was looking at their signings come in, I'm like, why are they signing these people? And then I looked into it and I was like, oh, it makes sense now because now they don't have to they can protect their young guys and put all these wasted signings to Seattle. Like, that makes so much sense. Kincaid's one of those guys, and Georgiev. I love what you said. Like, I wrote an article before last season about how it's a marathon NHL season under an 82-game season. This still is still a marathon. There's a lot of games to be played. You need a backup goalie to be able to handle the workload because you see the goalies that are winning Stanley Cups. Albeit Andrei Vasilevsky was able to be all over for the Tampa Bay Lightning, but I mean, you saw it in Dallas. Ben Bishop and Anton Khudobin, those guys are splitting the load. All these top teams in the league are splitting goaltender reps between both their starter and their backup. It's a 1A and 1B situation. And to be honest, the Rangers have one of the best 1As and 1Bs in the league.
They absolutely do. And we even saw that in the playoffs across the NHL. We saw it in the Carolina Rangers series where Mrazek and Reimer were both playing. Saw it all the way up to the conference finals, really. We didn't see that alpha goalie until the very end of the playoffs. And I definitely think that's a trend that is not just a flash in the pan. I think that is going to stay the case long term. Like you mentioned, we've talked about the Rangers defense has been by far the biggest issue on the team the last couple of seasons. I definitely think there's a solid amount of upside in terms of point producing from guys like Adam Fox, who had an amazing rookie year. I'm really excited to see Keandre Miller. We all know what D'Angelo's capable of in terms of quarterbacking the power play. But how much do you expect to see them improve in the defensive end of the ice? Because that's definitely the area where they have the most room for improvement.
Yeah, I think that also ties into the coaching and the system that they were running last season. I watched so many times last season where the Rangers just weren't there for certain plays. Like, it wasn't a defensive individual error. It just seemed like the system that they were running just was not the right move. I honestly, to be completely honest, I didn't want to re-sign Tony DeAngelo. I thought they could have capitalized on maybe his trade value and send him off to, I know he was a free agent, but you could have sent him off for the signing rights. They could have sent him off for some type of draft pick or something in return. I don't think Tony DeAngelo is going to be able to reproduce what he did this past season. But in terms of the defensive zone, I think that just really relies on whether Coach Quinn and all the other assistant coaches are able to build up a system to be able to defend better in front of the net and protect that front of the net a little bit better. Keandre, to be honest, Keandre Miller, you can't expect too much defensively out of him. If you look back at the World Juniors last season when he played for Team USA, his one flaw was the fact that he was not able to defend in the defensive zone for Team USA. Lots of bad turnovers, lots of mistakes in the defensive zone. Who knows? He might have improved on that. But he's also, this is his fourth full season playing defense. He used to be a forward before he went to Wisconsin. So he's got a lot of development he's got a lot of growing to do before he can be that second line defenseman.
No, I agree with you. I do think there's definitely some room for improvement there. I think you can make the same argument for D'Angelo or even Adam Fox to a lesser extent. And I'm not trying to criticize. I think it's important that Miller ends up playing with one of the Rangers' better defensemen. It sounds like he's going to start with Trouba, which I think is a decent pairing. We saw Trouba have a pretty rough season overall in New York, and I'm optimistic that he'll be better playing alongside Miller instead of Brady Shea last year and things like that. I did want to ask one more question related to the expansion draft. The last time this happened was when Vegas came in the league a couple years ago. The Rangers made similar moves. They brought in Michael Grabner and gave him the extra year so he can be exposed, and that ended up working out very well. And Oscar Lindbergh is the guy that Vegas ended up taking, and the Rangers have definitely got lucky there. But I don't know how realistic it is to expect it to work out that well again. But one guy the Rangers brought back for 2 years is Ryan Strome. And we all know he has that chemistry with Artemi Panarin. He ended up having his best season last year, but he did get a 2-year contract. I definitely am not big on the idea of making him a long-term contract commitment. Do you think he was given that second year so he could be exposed to Seattle, or would you be upset if he ends up going there?
I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't be upset at all because the two of the free agents the Rangers brought back, Ryan Strome and Tony DeAngelo, I was like, I'm okay letting them go. I'm honestly okay letting them go because one thing that is brought up a lot with this Rangers team is their poor face-off percentage. I mean, it's one of the worst in the league. Mika Zibanejad's not good at it. Ryan Strome is terrible at it. There's no good face-off depth on this team. So I was okay letting Strome go. I get his connection with Artemi Panarin, which is great. I'm okay bringing him back just for that connection, because if Artemi Panarin thrives with Ryan Strome, I mean, you see the production that Panarin's bringing. So give Panarin whoever he wants, and that's fine. But in terms of Ryan Strome, like the individual player, I'm okay with him just going. I don't think he brings that much to the table outside of what Panarin wants. And I wanted to be completely honest with you guys. A lot of Ranger fans do not like this take from me. I would have been okay not selecting Alexis Lafreniere. I wanted Quentin Byfield. Big body center. He can put the puck in the back of the net. He can play in all three zones of the ice. He's going to be a stud in Los Angeles. But that's who I would have rather. I was hoping the Rangers ended up with the second overall pick and taken Quentin Byfield. But hey, if Lafreniere can be like Sidney Crosby, like everyone says he's going to be, I'd be okay with that.
Byfield Turcotte's going to be wonderful to watch in Los Angeles for many years.
The West is going to be unreal with Turcotte and Byfield in LA. And then Kaliev is also in LA. He played for Team USA. And then Trevor Zegras for Anaheim. Like, it's that West is going to be full of USA guys, and I'm going to be all over it.
Yeah, it's possible the Rangers end up with an all-American defense if Miller gets in the lineup. All 6 projected defensemen could be from the U.S., which the Rangers have never had before. I definitely think that would be interesting. Since they ended up with the first pick, I think they kind of had to take Lafreniere only because if they weren't sold on him, they could have traded out of that pick if they were that desperate. But Lafreniere can basically be a center from the wing because his brain is his biggest asset. So I'm definitely excited to see the cerebral ability, because that's the biggest comparison to Sidney Crosby that I've seen. So you mentioned, we've talked about the center depth, talked about Byfield, who is a center. The Rangers, that's their area of the least organizational depth. The defense is the weakest area on the team right now, but the Rangers have some really strong prospects that are on the team now, and guys like Niels Lundqvist who are going to come over here in a year or two. So they have some potential solutions. But at center, the Rangers have Mika Zibanejad. They have Strome for now. They have Hedl, who I like but is not guaranteed. How much truth do you think there is? Because there's been a rumor that they're going to go after Pierre-Luc Dubois, who is unhappy in Columbus, and you got that John Davidson connection in the front office. I definitely think the Rangers, considering all the assets they have, are going to make a move for a center in a year or two. How realistic do you think that is, or even dreaming even bigger?
As the host in me, I'm switching this question back to you. How much do you like Pavel Buchnevich? Because I
like him a lot.
That's the player who's going to be involved in that deal, along with prospects and picks to acquire Pierre-Luc Dubois. I'd be okay with that. Center depth wins championships in this league. I've been a firm believer in that. And the Rangers, everyone you mentioned their defense being one of the worst parts of this team. I think their center depth is the worst of that is their biggest flaw on this team, is their center depth, because it's something that they have lacked for quite some time. The draft, they drafted Elias Anderson in. They had the chance to draft this kid, Michael Rasmussen. He ended up getting drafted to Detroit, but he's a big body centerman who I think he's going to come into the league and actually start producing. But it's just, they constantly pass over picking a good, strong centerman. I'm hoping this year is a breakout year for Filipino. I don't know if I want to go out, and you're going to need to trade the farm for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and I don't think I want to do it. I think that Davidson should stick to what they have going on now, build on the young guys instead of trading it away, and go from there.
No, I'm with you. I'm not saying I want to make that move this season. Dubois signed a 2-year deal in Columbus. He's going to be a restricted free agent after that. So we got that bridge deal. If they do it in the second year of the contract where he'd be a rental, it would bring the price down. I'd be more open to it then. And then there's the even bigger rumors about Jack Eichel and Alex Barkov. So I'd be even more curious. Those two would cost a lot. And the Rangers got the good value in terms of when they got Trouba, because it only cost them Pionk and the first round pick they got from Winnipeg for Kevin Hayes, who also sucked at faceoffs, by the way. Yeah. But the trade for a guy like Eichel or Barkov or Dubois would cost a lot more, and Buchnevich would be the minimum going the other way.
Oh yeah.
I was a big advocate to try to get John Tavares to New York. I thought he would have been a good fit. Toronto sort of fizzled out these last few years going to a rebuild there, but that clearly didn't happen. The rumors are circulating around Jack Eichel. We've talked about it on this show before, and that'd be an interesting fit. You bring someone in there. But one quick question before we end up going here. Where do you guys see the Rangers finishing this season?
Not in the playoffs. Not in the playoffs is where I see them finishing. It's a tough East division. That division is tough, man. I think you can already pencil in 3 of the 4 teams that are going to make the playoffs from that division: Washington, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. I think those teams are penciled in, and then you have Buffalo. Buffalo is, I don't want to say Buffalo is a team to beat, but they're on the rise. And you have New Jersey's battling back, and then you have, of course, the Islanders. I mean, the Islanders are a good team. Oh, and wait, hey, Boston's still in there too. So like, it's really tough to be in the East Division. It's one of the toughest divisions. So I don't see the Rangers in the playoffs this season.
I don't see the Rangers in the playoffs this season either, and I don't even see that as a problem. The Rangers have had the great fortune of being able to accelerate the rebuild a little bit by moving up in the lottery twice the last 2 drafts, which is great. They've done a solid job stockpiling prospects, but the division is incredibly tough. The Metro was tough last year. I think best case scenario this year is most likely a 6th place finish in the division, ahead of maybe the Devils and Buffalo. The other 5 teams in the division, I think, are all better on paper than the Rangers right now, but getting that experience, getting the ice time that these young players need is going to be more beneficial. I just don't want to see the Rangers make one of those short-sighted moves to try to get a rental at the deadline and make the playoffs. They need to be patient. I still think they're a year or 2 away, but that future is very bright.
Oh, look, you named Mika Zibanejad your captain. Oh, look, there he goes to Tampa again. Another captain traded away to Tampa.
Yeah, I think they finish about 5th or 6th in that division. I mean, there's not too much there. That's a tough division, like you guys said. So, Vinny, we want to thank you for your time. Let everyone know where they can find you, and stay tuned to everything you got going on. So where can they find you at?
Oh, the AJ is going to kill me for not being able to remember the social medias for the Rough Cut podcast. But, I'm going to go for it and try my best here. AJ, don't kill me here. You can follow the Rough Cut Sportscast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at the Rough Cut Sportscast. I think on Twitter it's at the Rough _Sportscast or Rough Cut. I don't know. Either way, you can follow me at Vinny Powerplay on Twitter, and you can follow my other hockey show at the Power Play Podcast. That one's everywhere. That one's simple. I got to talk to AJ about simplifying things here.
Once again, we want to thank you for your time, and we'd love to have you back sometime in the future talking more hockey. But outside of that, that's going to wrap it up for the Rangers segment. We'll talk Islanders after the break. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed the advertisement there from Anchor. They're the ones distributing everything out, so feel free to click on them, as I said in the advertisement. But let's talk Islanders. Matthew Barzal's back on a 3-year contract, but first of all, let's talk about their 2019 season. Great run for this team, 35, 23, and 10 in the regular season. Made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Final, where they took Tampa Bay to overtime in the last 2 games of that series and came up short in Game 6. Great fight from that team. We talked about Barry Trotz going down the stretch last season, but Do you think they could potentially repeat, or do you think that their time's over?
That's actually a really tough question to answer because the Islanders are in what we call cap hell, or referring to salary cap hell. Even more so than the Rangers and the Blackhawks, they are only cap compliant at the moment because they were able to put Johnny Boychuk on long-term injured reserve. And I do want to point out that he was forced to retire due to some health issues as well. He unfortunately will not be coming back, and he's had a very solid career with that booming slap shot for the Bruins and Islanders all these years. I definitely want to put out my well wishes to him health-wise. But because of that, it did provide the Islanders a little bit of flexibility on the salary cap. They have a bunch of third and fourth line forwards and one or two defensemen on these multi-million-dollar contracts that have really forced their hand. They have Andrew Ladd's contract as the most obvious example of an absolute nightmare on given a 7-year deal on free agency that I believe still has 3 years left. We've seen it to a lesser extent with guys like Leo Komarov and Thomas Hickey and Matt Martin, who just actually re-signed 4 years, 1.5 a year. It's not a huge salary cap hit, but that money does come in handy. And the Islanders were forced to trade Devon Toews in the offseason to Colorado, partially because of that mismanagement of the salary cap. Basically, where I'm going with all that is because they don't have a lot of financial flexibility to upgrade the team, I think that we kind of, at least with the roster they have right now, getting back to the Eastern Conference Finals, I think would be their ceiling. I don't see a lot of room for improvement right now because there aren't too many young guys who can improve on that team. It's mostly guys who are already established veterans, although there are some exceptions.
You hit the nail on the head. Every single talking point that I had, you brought up. But other than that, look, Andrew Ladd, he was waived earlier today. So I don't know what that says about his contract. Probably going to have to eat the money. Maybe he's one that goes down or no one's going to claim him. But then he's going to come back up to be somewhere going on there. But Andrew Ladd, he's been waived. Horrible contract there, like you said. Absolutely horrible. 7 years. Insane. Thank goodness Bowman didn't pick his pockets for that one. Barzell's re-signed on a 3-year deal. That's good for him. 2 more signings. You mentioned Matt Morton, but Andy Green is also back. He made the roster.
He did. He got a 1-year deal, and that one's fine. $700,000. The Islanders, they have a pretty clear top 6 on defense. I do want to see Noah Dobson get some more minutes this year, kind of taking over for Devon Toews or filling that role a little bit. He's a solid defense prospect. I would definitely like to see that. We saw Ryan Pulak have a fantastic playoffs for the Islanders. He really broke out. He was great on the back end. And the Islanders are the strength of their team is the defensive part of the team, or the defensive structure. They are great at limiting shots, making life easier on the goaltenders. And I think we should talk about the Islanders goaltending situation a little bit. They're bringing Semyon Varlamov back. He's got 3 more years on his deal. He will be the starter. But Ilya Sorokin, who was a 3rd-round pick for the Islanders, think back in 2014, is finally there with the team now. He is going to get some games without question. He'll start off as the backup. I think it'll be another timeshare situation, and I'm excited to see how he does for the team.
Yeah, I think obviously he's not that high of a pick, but I think their situation there could sort of be a few years back with when Nashville went with Pekka Rinne, still had UC Saros there, gave him the keys to back up, get some game action, and I thought that worked out pretty well. Now Saros is, I think he's taken over that net for Nashville. I mean, it's less of a timeshare there. I don't think maybe that takes place. Obviously, Varlamov isn't the same caliber goaltender Pekka Rinne was. Heck, he's a Vezina winner. But I like what you brought up there about Sorokin. I think he's going to have a decent role on this team this year. Varlamov, you know what you're going to get from him. Pretty solid goaltender. He's had some good years in the NHL, Colorado, Washington, even in the Islanders so far. So I think there's a lot going on there with him. But let's talk about these forwards. I mean, Matt Martin's back, Anders Lee, big money, Jordan Eberle, big money, Brock Nelson, Josh Bailey, Beauvillier. I mean, what else do they have there? I mean, you know what you're going to get there?
I mean, the Islanders forwards, I think they do have a few very good ones. It was obviously critical for them to get Matt Barzal under contract. I thought the 3 years, $7 million a year is fair for both sides. He will be a restricted free agent after that, so they should have a little bit more flexibility at that point. Johnny Boychuk's contract will be off the books, so will Thomas Hickey and Leo Komarov's, I believe. So when Barzal is due another raise at that point, they should be able to make that work. I mean, we also have to talk about John Gabriel Pageau here, who was signed to a big contract, had a solid year. And as much as I hate the Islanders, I am excited to see a line that they've been running in training camp. They have Pageau centering They have Kiefer Bellows on one side and Oliver Wahlstrom on the other. And those two are both first-round picks of the Islanders, I believe, in 16 and 18. They were drafted in the top 10 or 12 in each of those drafts, and they have a lot of upside. They're finally going to get some legitimate run because we're not going to see quite as much out of guys like Josh Bailey or Casey Zizekas at this point, or Cal Clutterbuck in their careers. I know Zizekas is in a contract year. The Islanders are going to have some roster turnover coming up, but they aren't going to be able to really trade these contracts either, because even the teams that have the salary cap space aren't really going to be doing them any favors unless they attach some assets. They did pick up 2 second-round picks from Colorado. They might be able to attach one of those to a Leo Komarov type of contract to try to get themselves a little more flexibility. Nobody's claiming Andrew Ladd's contract. He's going to rot in Bridgeport where he belongs. And the Islanders have made some other pretty questionable decisions over the years for bottom six type of players. That is going to affect them. We do need to talk about they have a very solid top line. They have a solid top six with some offensive ability, but the defense is the strength of that team. They have a solid and interesting mix of experience at the goaltending position, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that team coalesces during this season because they're coming off a high last year.
Yeah, going back to Andrew Ladd, rotten in Bridgeport. I mean, not only is he rotten, he's waiting to play hockey. I mean, AHL, he's going to have to wait a little bit longer than he'd hope, but hey, that's what you're going to get. He's getting paid big money to play in the AHL. Maybe he has some stats that he hadn't had in a long time. But other than that, like you said, the defense, there's an interesting mix. I've always loved Nick Leddy. He's one of my favorite defensemen in hockey. He just does a lot for that team. And I think it's the thing with this Islanders team, you have no idea what they're going to do. They could be a good team or they could absolutely fall to pieces. You just don't know what you have here. And I think a lot of it does fall on Ilya Sorokin. I think he's the big X factor because we talked about in the Rangers segment, you need two goalies to win in this league. And if one of them is cold and the other one's hot, it's going to be tough to gauge which one to play at the time.
It is. I think we're going to see a timeshare legitimately there because Sorokin is who's going to be groomed to be the long-term goalie, or at least that's what the Islanders are hoping for. But Varlamov is also under contract for 3 more seasons, so it's not going to be that easy to get rid of him if they need to. I'm not saying he's a bad goalie. He's far from it. But if the Islanders get in that situation where he becomes the 1B compared to the 1A, he's a very expensive 1B situation, and Sorokin's eventually going to be due for a raise if he performs well. I do think on the defense, besides Pulak and Nick Leddy, we also have to talk about Adam Pelech a little bit. I thought he impressed in the bubble situation for the Islanders. He was a big part of that team playing on a second pairing role. I think he can definitely come back and do that again. At the top for the Islanders, though, that forward line with Barzal, we're going to see Anders Lee, Brock Nelson. I'm curious to see what Beauvillier does. Maybe he'll shoot more shots than Anna Kendrick during the season and keep things entertaining. Yeah, there is definitely some talent on the team, but their financial resources are very limited. They have to get creative with the salary cap for both this season and next season. They're still going to have a lot of the same issues because other than Zizekas, these contracts are mostly under the books for at least 2 more years, including this one. And it's going to definitely have an impact on what they can do to build that team under Lou Lamoriello and Barry Trotz.
The way I see this Islanders team this year, they're going to have a great record come trade deadline, but they can't get better. They can't get better because they don't have the financial ability to bring someone in, even on a 1-year deal. They don't have any cap room to bring that in. And that's where I think teams around them get better, and they just missed the playoffs.
I know we kind of hit on it in the Rangers segment. The Rangers and Islanders are in the same division. It's the top 4 teams in each division that are going to make the playoffs, right? And I think it's fair to assume, or at least it's an educated guess, that Boston, Pittsburgh, and Washington are highly likely to occupy 3 of those spots in this division compared to the Islanders. Now, I would be surprised if any of Buffalo or New Jersey or the Rangers end up in the playoffs from this division. So that would leave the Islanders to compete with the Philadelphia Flyers, who they ended up beating in the playoffs last year for that 4th and final spot. And I think the Flyers should be considered the favorite right now. I don't necessarily say that's going to be a particular order, but to me, the Islanders are going to be battling for the 4th and final spot in that division. I do think you can say a couple teams are better than them, and I think it's very possible they end up finishing 5th and being that odd team out in, I'd say, the strongest division in hockey.
Yeah, that division is going to be fun to watch all year. It's going to be very competitive. But that's going to wrap it up for today. We had a lot of good talks, both Bears breakdown and then, of course, our big hockey episode. So stay tuned on that. We're now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You know, we're on YouTube if you're watching here. If not, check us out there. You can see our pretty little faces and engage with us there too. And if you do head over to Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating there. Click 5 stars or any stars that you feel is appropriate, and please leave a review on that as well. So other than that, we don't have too much to bring to you. Click subscribe, do the things, comments, and head over to Twitter for our poll question of the week. We'll talk about that real quick. The poll question of the week: which team will be better this season? Is it going to be the New York Rangers or the dreaded brother New York Islanders? Find out on that. Vote there. It's going to be fun to see the poll results, and just follow the page, Big City Sports PD on Twitter. Outside of that, we're wrapping it up today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.